So day zero is finally here after Trump and Joe Biden barnstormed through the battleground states, concluding what has been an extraordinary campaign conducted amid the health crisis, the pandemic, and growing deep economic anxiety. It's going to be many hours before we start getting a clear picture of what the outcome might be, but it's day zero, as we mentioned. Live now to DC, correspondent Simon Marks, who has a busy 2 days ahead of him. Simon, good afternoon to South African time. Early voting, we know, has shattered records, and no doubt many, many more will turn out today.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Jeremy. I mean, we know that we were heading towards 100 million participating in early voting. In the 2016 election, total turnout, including early voting, which was much less popular then than it is now, was around 130 million. Many analysts believe that by the time the 2020 election is said and done, between early voting, in-person voting today and postal voting, which of course continues until that last envelope gets postmarked with today's date later tonight, you could see a total voter turnout here of 150, 155 million. So essentially it looks like around 50 million people will be voting today, on top of the roughly 90 to 100 million that have already participated. And then, of course, we'll start getting the results as soon as the polls close in states all over the country. As the sun goes down in each respective state from the east to the west coast, then the counting gets underway. Some of the counting gets done pretty quickly because a lot of the early voting has already been tabulated in some of these states. So we could see larger numbers coming out in the immediate aftermath of polls closing than one would normally expect to see. But there's also a general air of uncertainty surrounding all of this, tension and foreboding, as we were talking about yesterday, but uncertainty because the traditional methods of carrying out exit polls that the television networks do to inform the projections that they make have all been turned on their head by COVID-19 and the pandemic. And so these exit polls are going to have to take into account early voting just as much as they take into account today's voting, because clearly more than half the electorate has already cast their ballots.
I want to come back and for you to remind us just how high the stakes are. There is an editorial in the New York Times today that says that the country is not voting for a president, but a complete restart of the country.
Yeah, I don't think that's overstating it. I mean, the stakes have never been higher, certainly in the quarter of a century that I've been living in the United States. Every presidential candidate every 4 years always tells you this is the most important election of our lifetime. But genuinely, this is the most important election of Americans' lifetimes, because it's going to determine whether not just the United States but the world is going to be in for another 4 years of a complete roller coaster ride, totally unpredictable, another 4 years of a president who is not really underpinned by any kind of cogent political ideology. I mean, Donald Trump is not truly a conservative Republican. Trumpism is something quite distinct from republicanism, which is why dissident Republican groups like the Lincoln Project, if you've seen any of their social media postings and advertisements, a grouping of disaffected Republicans that want to take the party back to the roots of Abraham Lincoln's original republicanism, they have had so much impact in this election. They raised $39 million from like-minded centrist Republicans in the third quarter of this year alone. So they are pushing to remove Donald Trump from the White House, just as the Democrats and Joe Biden are saying this is a moment when the country has to decide, as Joe Biden puts it, does it want truth over lies? Does it believe in science? Is it going to restore some semblance of normalcy when it comes to the public comportment and the sort of presidential behaviour that Americans traditionally witness from whoever's occupying the Oval Office, a Republican or a Democrat. And in global terms, of course, a president who's taken the country out of the Paris climate change, out of the Iran nuclear deal, who's threatening the NATO alliance on an ongoing basis. Massive, massive stakes.
Simon Marks, I want to end our conversation with this quote, and I want you to cast your mind back at 12 years. This is what John McCain said. A little while ago, I had the honour of calling Senator Barack Obama to congratulate him on being elected the next president of the country that we both love. That tone and tenor is not going to emerge again once we have any sort of result, is it?
Well, I think we shouldn't rule out the possibility of a surprise, Jeremy. I mean, maybe we'll discover, if Joe Biden does indeed secure the keys to the White House, that Donald Trump is the conceding type. He certainly hasn't shown himself to be the conceding type up until now, and as you know, he's lawyered up to the hilt, preparing to battle this out if there is anything other than a Joe Biden landslide later today or tomorrow. I think there are huge questions about the days and weeks ahead, because remember, once you lose an American presidential election, you don't immediately leave the White House. Donald Trump will be president until the stroke of midday here on January the 20th. So win or lose, he's got weeks available to him to jam through all sorts of changes in rules and regulations to try and create a fait accompli for his successor to inherit in a whole area of policies. And I think you can expect, if Joe Biden wins, not just a bit of a drawn-out transition in terms of when that phone call gets made, but also real activity behind the scenes between now and January the 20th to tie things up in knots for a Biden administration to inherit. Now, we don't know that any of that is going to happen. Maybe he'll surprise us. Maybe he'll pick up the phone and concede and say, I understand that the mandate has been delivered to my opponent, and maybe there will be a cooperative transition, the type of which we saw traditionally between George W. Bush, for example, and Barack Obama. But based on what we've seen so far, you wouldn't bet the farm on it.
Until later on this afternoon and into the evening, correspondent in Washington, Simon Marks, thank you very much indeed.